is The Art of Wrestling with professional wrestler Colt Cabana.
All right, how you guys doing? Come on in, sit down, relax. You're about to listen to The Art of Wrestling, a professional wrestling podcast. It's a life podcast. It's personal journals and entry into the minds and souls, and hearts and lives of the people involved in the world of professional wrestling. I am your host. My name is Colt Cabana. I was a champion. I am no longer a champion, but I am a winner of the hearts of the Japanese fans. I would like to think I'm also a cultured man. I will also be an attendee. Most importantly, though, I am a professional wrestler, and I am not sitting here live in my studio apartment in Chicago, Illinois. No, I am in a small little Japanese dorm room in Shinkawa, Japan. Joey Ryan is upstairs in his little dorm room. So I do have neighbors, but they're few and far between. Before I go any further, this is a fan-supported and listener-supported podcast, supported by people just like you. We get to free charge every single Thursday. ColtCabana.com, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts from. Couple great ways that you can support, rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes. Tell a friend. Spread the word social media-wise. Otherwise, ColtMerch.com, DigitalColt.com, T-shirts, buttons, pictures, posters, DVDs, digital downloads, premium podcasts, a wrestling book, little action figures, buttons, pins, I got it all. Please, I'll ship it to you when I get home from Japan. ColtMerch.com, DigitalColt.com. I'm still in the Japanese little house. I decided to stay an extra day so I could go to Wrestle Kingdom and see some of my friends wrestle. I thought, when am I ever going to have that experience again? So I might as well just stay here on someone else's ticket, go in to the show on someone else's ticket, and enjoy some wrestling and my wrestling friends on a large stage. Not to say I don't do things on a large stage. Been really fun in Korakuen Hall. March 25th, I will be in Rigoku. I think it's at Sumo Hall. It's like a 6,000-seater for DDT, which makes me very happy. Meaning I will be back in Japan. The DDT stuff has been successful. In my head, that's when we restart the new version of the podcast is on the first trip of Japan, but who knows? What I do know is a lot of you guys sent in some questions for me to answer. I picked some really fun ones. We're going to play them. I'm going to answer them, and hopefully all of the questions for the new move into the new future of the art of wrestling will be answered. If not, I'll try to address anything at the very end. But I mean, without further ado, this is the show today. It's an AMA, Ask Me Anything, and I think I should start answering some questions and putting out a fun podcast today. So here we go.
Hey, Colt, Danny Brockdorf from Morristown, New Jersey. Just wanted to reach out and see how you think your new podcast format will differ from what you do in real time on social media. I was wondering that as I was listening to you explaining it, and I wondered if you'd given it any thought as of this point. Thanks for all the great shows, and look forward to hearing the new format.
All right, great question, Danny. How is it going to change from social media? I think the question should be more, how is it going to be a little bit different from the old podcast? What I guess I want to make clear is a couple things I want to make clear from last week's show, and kind of, I don't know how well I explained it, but there's still going to be guests on. I'm going to have guests on, we're going to be talking, and I'm not going to put a limit. Like, this guy was on last week, so I'm going to wait another 5 years to have him on. I mean, they're probably going to be short little talks, and I think there are going to be more talks about what's happening now in the present as opposed to the past, which is, I think, a big staple of what the show was. So social media is just kind of, I guess, where I'm at, and it's also 20-second clips of Instagram or little sentences as opposed to documentation of the wrestler's life. This I want, in my head, I want this to be documentation of the wrestler's life, what we're going through, who we've been wrestling, weird or funny stories of the present. So in my head, it's not going to be, this is what we had for lunch, but it might be. I mean, if it comes and makes a fun story, but I want it to be an inside look of what we're doing in the present. I do want to say, this won't be as good as the last 7.5 years. That was the staple. I mean, that was, I grew it to what it was. This is just something new and fun to breathe new life into the show and to keep it going. Instead of just stopping it, we're going to keep it going with this idea that I thought was a fun one. And I brainstormed with a lot of different people, and truth be told, Kevin Steen was someone I talked with about it, and he was like, man, I really like when you just talk on the opening parts. Like, I wouldn't mind. He's like, don't stop the show, just do the opening parts. And I was like, yeah. He's like, if you just do the opening parts and you talk about the stuff that's happening in your life, I think it'd be fun. And so I think with the help of Kevin, that's going to be the podcast going further. as opposed to me writing jokes on social media.
Hey, Colt Cabana. Eli Surge here, at Real Eli Surge on Twitter and Instagram. As a young wrestler, I have to reach out to promoters sending my headshots and highlight reels, that sort of thing, to get booked. With how long you've been in wrestling, do you still do that, or do all of your bookings come from people contacting you? Thanks.
Eli Surge. Headshots. Are headshots a thing? Is that a thing in professional wrestling? Oh, my first headshot. I remember AWA, Dale Gagner, called himself Dale Gagne, asked for pictures for the show that I was doing for him, and I was like, oh, I need an 8x10. I got in my little outfit, I got on a knee, and I was doing like the poses. Remember, this is 1999. So I did like a pose that I thought you were supposed to do. I think it was on one knee with a flex. I had sunglasses on, of course, and I tried to find a wall that wasn't covered with anything, but you could still see the electrical outlet in the back. Now, I gave that to him. I'm pretty sure he thought that was the funniest thing ever. But at the time, I was like, yeah, my first 8x10. So I don't know if we called it headshots. And my dad still has that picture somewhere. I got to bust that out. He had it in his office for years, like proud of it. And then, 15 years into my career, I was like, oh my God, how embarrassing. I am such an idiot, which I think is fun of the things that you do early in your career that you'll look back and be like, I was an idiot. And luckily for me, I am not sending out videos or headshots or really asking for bookings much these days. Sometimes I will hit some people up if I really want to work there. But luckily for me, and you got to remember, business-wise, man, as a business-wise, part of the idea of starting the podcast, and I'll let you on the inside a little bit, is the idea that afterwards, when I do plugs and upcoming events, I want a promoter to be like, oh shit, Colt's reaching a lot of people, and he's talking about the upcoming events. If I book Colt on a show, he's going to talk about me on the podcast, and that's exactly what I did, and I built a nice little formula for myself. So maybe that's something that you want to do as a wrestler, is give somebody a reason to put you on the show, especially nowadays when social media is so prevalent. Back when I started, there was no such thing as social media, and it was just about having good wrestlers on the show, which it should be to this day. But now a big part of my plan is I want to say to myself, why would the promoter want to spend money, fly me in, and put me up in a hotel? And I do say that to myself a lot. I try to justify my own paydays. And one of the reasons I can justify it is with advertising on this show. And luckily, my name has been out there enough that if people see that I'm on the show, A, they know I'm going to work hard. B, they know I'm going to be funny. C, they know I could bring somebody to the show. And if they're worried about their friend who's never came to wrestling, enjoying wrestling, they know that I'll be on the show. And if they watch my match, they're going to be like, oh, wrestling is hilarious and fun. So for me, I have my regulars, Ring of Honor, AAW, AIW, Wrestle Circus, First Wrestling in Minnesota. So there's these guys that will always kind of bring me in, and then I can fill in a schedule. And then there's always just kind of random promoters or people, Japanese tours, European tours that I kind of fill the rest of the schedule in with, that I'm lucky enough that people are kind of shooting me dates. So on the back half of my career, I'm a little bit luckier, Eli.
Hey, Colt Cabana, I'm a huge fan. Been a fan since God.
Since God?
God knows when. My favorite episode is episode 138 with Tommaso Ciampa. It helped really bring things together for me as far as my mental health and everything. My question is for you, have you ever gotten positive feedback from other wrestlers on how your podcast has helped change their life? Thank you again for all you do, dude.
You got it, buddy. Yeah, Tommaso, I mean, it's a good question. I think everyone, at least my friends, have all came back and said how much they enjoyed it, how much they enjoyed being on it. Tommaso and I had a chat after that show, and if you don't know, kind of he talked about not a dark past, but maybe a dark past and decisions that he made in his life and ways that he wanted to change his life. And I remember him saying to his wife before he did the show, she asked, are you going to talk about that stuff? And he's like, I don't know if it comes up. And I always weirdly found that as a weird pat on my own back, that it gradually kind of came up. He was very comfortable about talking about it. And in his head, he had a mindset of like, well, I'll talk about it if it comes up. And that's the kind of stuff I want to know. And it was able to get there. And I know he still tells me that people still talk to him about that episode. And if you want to hear more of that kind of stuff, Marty DeRosa has a show called Wrestling with Depression, and they talked about it also. I think Marty was really inspired by Tommaso also saying what he said on my show. and Marty's show is called Wrestling with Depression, so they kind of jumped into a little more facets of that. Positivity wise, that's not a word, but it sounded about right. I think the older guys who didn't know what's happening on the show come back and are like, oh my God, I didn't expect so many people to talk to me about it. And I'm trying to think of examples. There was people like at conventions, like Scott Norton was somebody would say they came up to him and said something. But there was some of the older guys who were at conventions, and they were known for these WWE runs or WWF runs or WCW runs. And they would tell me, they're like, more people come up to me and tell me how much they like me on the Art of Wrestling podcast than anything else. And I always thought that was such a sweet thing and very validating. Also, that was probably, more 5 or 4 years ago. Again, kind of when the idea of the long form sit down talk wasn't being done by everybody. And now I don't hear that stuff as much. But, I still hear it, and I still hear people tell me, oh, man, everyone always talks to me about doing the podcast. So not as specific as I'd like to get with you, bud, but I hope that was okay.
Hey, Colt, this is Brandon from Detroit. What's with you and PWG? How come you don't wrestle there anymore? Is there any kind of heat? What's going on?
Oh, Brandon, he wants to know the scoops. Yeah, I was on the very first PWG show, and even when they stopped kind of using me, I even championed it a lot on my very early podcasts when I was talking about independent wrestling and how great independent wrestling was. And I know I've heard from a lot of people of how, I was one of their first kind of insights into the world of pro wrestling. And that was one I would always say, like, you have to go check this out because it's such a great vibe. And obviously, not because of me, but obviously it's since really, really caught on, and Reseda has become such a hotbed of independent wrestling. Yeah, I came back from WWE. I did a couple of those shows, and then they kind of stopped using me. And I think it's because he wanted a real specific style of Roderick Strong. Like that encapsulizes everything about PWG was Roderick Strong. And then about 2015, I think, he asked me to do All-Star Weekend, and I think I was booked somewhere else at that time. And then since then, I haven't been asked to do any shows. So I have nothing against them. We have no heat. I think it's just the idea of young, spot, fast, untapped talent, I guess. Obviously, I'd love to do PWG, and sometimes when I'm out in California and there's a show, I'll reach out and be like, hey, I'm open. So this is for Eli. Hey, Eli, sometimes I'll reach out and say, hey, I'm open if you want to use me. And I don't hear back, and then I just assume that's a no. So as of now, that's what we got.
Hey, Colt, it's Mitch Coyne from one of the cruise lines. I want to say thanks for answering some of my emails over the years and for giving me loads of entertainment. Anyways, my question for you is, you're almost 20 years into your career. You've done a whole lot. This podcast is amazing. You have some amazing matches. Are there any moments, any time in your career nowadays that you feel like, retiring or hang out the boots or taking a break from wrestling and trying something else? And if so, what are those days like? Is it a specific thing that happens, or is it just kind of moods that happen? Anyways, thanks a lot. Have a great day. Bye.
Hey, Mitch, one of the cruise lines. Which one is that? I'm going on a Jericho cruise. Maybe I'll see you on there. Have I ever quit? Have I ever wanted to slow it down? So the reality is no, I'm 37. In my head, I could do this till I'm like 50, 55, 60, probably forever. I think we shun the older, but also I'm in Japan, and it's celebrated a lot. A lot of these guys, Masato Tanaka's, I think, 47 years old, and he's like the top of his career. He's so good. I'll see him wrestling over here. And also DDT in New Japan and Noah, they kind of champion a little bit the older guys. They know the ones who have been before, and they make sure not to kick them out of wrestling. An instance I did have was I was getting a lot of auditions, and I kind of had to ask myself, is this the next step of my career? And I believe it is, to kind of slowly transition into doing some act. I was on Chicago PD and Marin, and so you want to start building some momentum of that, but I also don't want to turn down wrestling. And so I thought to myself, like, do I stop doing as much wrestling so I'm available for auditions? Because I had to turn down a lot of auditions because I was wrestling. But at the end of the day, you do the auditions to get the work, and I'm already working, so why would I turn down work? And so I kind of made a promise to myself that as long as the work is still coming in, I'm going to wrestle as much as I can. And when the work starts to slow down, maybe that's when I start transitioning into more kind of acting stuff over there in Chicago. And I think a lot of people think because I'm doing commentary with Ring of Honor that I'm just not wrestling anymore. And I think those are the not uneducated people, but those are the people that aren't as open or know as much about the scene. And that makes me sad a little bit because I want to make sure that people know that I'm still wrestling all the time. That Ring of Honor are my bookings. I do commentary for them. But besides that, I'm wrestling everywhere. And this is something you guys know, and I want to keep it that way. At least for, I think at least for 10 more years. We'll see. I think I've aged pretty well from 27 to 37, so we'll see where I go from 37 to 47. I might be a wreck in 10 years, and I might not be able to do it, but in my head now, I'll be good.
Hello, Colt. This is Grayson from Austin. I was wondering if you were going to do anything special before the format change of The Art of Wrestling, such as episode 100 when CM Punk interviewed you.
Hey, Grayson, this is as special as it gets, buddy. This is what you're getting. The next couple of months, I'm going to be putting out some old podcasts, just rerunning them. I think I'm going to do a Twitter vote. So if you're on Twitter and you want to vote for which one you want to see, I'll be doing one of those polls, and you guys can decide what episode you'd like to hear. Other than that, this is it, friend.
What's up, Colt? This is Marty from Chicago. I'm just wondering, do you have any advertisers on the show this week?
Marty, that's a great question. I thought nobody would ever ask that. I do have an advertiser this week, and it's Stamps.com. They're sponsoring the show, and they want you to keep your New Year's resolutions of saving time and money this year. Stamps.com, they're bringing you all the service of the U.S. Postal Service right to your computer, right to your home. Just create a Stamps.com account online in minutes and print official U.S. postage for any letter, package, or class of mail, and a mail person will pick it up right from your house, apartment, trailer, office, whatever. I do this all the time. I just print out my ColtMerch.com orders, I leave them downstairs, and they're gone the next day. It's like cookies for Santa Claus or matzah for Hanukkah Claus. How do I know how to buy the right stamps? Well, Stamps.com sent me a digital scale that calculates the exact postage. Thanks to everyone who bought from ColtMerch.com, and thanks to Stamps.com for letting me get everyone their package. And if you want to enjoy Stamps.com too, you can. They have a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus postage and includes that digital scale. Head to Stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in Colt. That's Stamps.com. Enter Colt at the homepage and start shipping your package or mail right from your own chair. Marty, that's a great question, sir.
Hey, Colt. Dan from Chicago. First-time caller, long-time listener. Heard the big news. Wanted to say congratulations on the last 380 episodes and really looking forward to the new format. It sounds really interesting, and I'm going to keep on following. The big news caused me to reflect on my favorite moments and guests from the Art of Wrestling, and one name kept coming up over and over again, and that's Power Udi. The question is, after episode 59, available on Stitcher Premium, did you or Cliff have any follow-up interactions with Power Udi that you'd like to share with us, the podcast listeners? Is Power Udi even aware that episode 59 is all about him? I totally understand if you don't want to answer this question based upon Power Udi's current situation in Nigeria. Hope you're having fun in Japan. Brenda says hi.
Hey, Dan. Yeah, it is a touchy subject, that Power Udi. He's no good. Oh, the power of Power Udi. The only thing after that, first of all, I forget if Cliff told the story or somebody told the story, but there was the story of somebody who ran into Power Udi, crazily enough, and if you're there, send a tweet, would you, in New York City, and was like, oh my God, Power Udi. And the idea that Power Udi thought to himself, like, yeah, I'm Power Udi. Of course everyone's recognizing me, is one of my favorite stories just of wrestling in general. But Cliff tried to get Power Udi to wrestle on a $5 Wrestling, I think at a WrestleCon, and sadly it never came. So that's the only thing that would have came of that. I'm unaware if Power Udi is aware of his fame from the podcast, but I think Power Udi is a little like off. And so if we've learned anything, he's just one of those people. In my head, he's like Beetlejuice from Howard Stern. Like, he doesn't know what's going on. He's just doing his thing. In my head, that's what I've concocted of Power Udi. So sadly, we never saw the match, and I don't think we're going to see much of Power Udi in the future. Thanks, Dan.
Hi, Colt. This is Tiffany from Louisville, Kentucky. So you've already mastered the art of storytelling when it comes to the audio and video formats. Have you ever considered writing memoirs? You already have one book done. Might as well keep going, right?
Hi, Tiff. I have no desire to write a memoir. I remember sitting down and writing one early in the Art of Wrestling days, being like, oh, I could probably put out a book. And I started one page, and I just have one page. Maybe I'll put out that one page for you, but it's been sitting there for a while on my laptop. One thing I did start doing when I was in the WWE is I was realizing from my debut how awful my debut was, and I talk about that a lot, and I started writing a week-to-week synopsis of what happened after I came home from TV. But I only did like 8 TVs, so somewhere there's me talking about what happened each week at TV and my feelings about wrestling. I might put that out somewhere, because to me that's also kind of a catalyst of the start of the Art of Wrestling, because I'm talking really in depth about the behind the scenes and how I feel like, oh, this character's in a lot of trouble. You know, I started off this way, but it's in real time. It's not looking back or reflecting. I'm sure if enough people bug me, I'll find that somewhere. I think the children's book are my memoirs. You know my affinity for reading, and that's about as good as it's going to get from me. But I appreciate the compliment.
Hi Colt, it's Rob from London. I'd quite like to know some of the technical details around how you record your podcast, so the type of equipment you use, what software you're going into, and how that's changed, because I know it's changed over the years, especially in light of your new podcast plan for the future. I'd like to know what remote gear you'll be taking around with you to record all your adventures. Thanks very much.
Hey, that's a good question. Remote gear, here's the honesty. I plan on getting an iPhone X when I get home. And I know I always talk about the importance of audio, but in my head, it's like the stuff that I use is very nice and it's crisp, and that's the stuff you'll be mainly hearing. And then I kind of like the juxtaposition. Did I just use that word? Get out of here, Cabana. I think I used it right. The juxtaposition of having that iPhone kind of quote-unquote remote gear, it gives you the sounds of the road. But I wouldn't want a whole podcast to be like that, because I am a stickler for good audio. I use now the H6 Zoom. I use SM58 microphones on the road. That's the one I'm using right now. When I'm in my apartment, I have a SM7B. These are Shure microphones. Now, a guy came up to me at WrestlePalooza in Minnesota and said he represented a microphone company and he wanted to give me all free microphone stuff. And I was like, yes, I will use your microphones and then we will promote your microphones. And then I never heard back from him. So as of now, I am using Shure's. I'm on a Zoom H6, which used to be a Zoom H4, but is not anymore. I upgraded a little bit, and I still edit on GarageBand because I have a Mac, and I don't know. I get how to use it. I know how to do it, and that's it. So it's very simple for me. A lot of people ask that. I'm happy to tell people, and hopefully it will make their audio sound better. I also use a program called the Levelator to level all my levels out, because I am not a master of leveling. When it's too hard for me, sometimes I will pay my friend Creaky, and he will make it sound like magic. Like there was an episode with Conan where we did it in a hallway, and the echo was like out of control. I said, Creaky. He goes, I gotcha. And he made it listenable. It wasn't listenable before, but some of the ones have been saved thanks to Creaky.
Hey, Colt. This is Sergio from Chicago. One of my best nights as a wrestling fan was the night you came back to Ring of Honor when you faced Kaylee for the ROH Championship. That match was so much fun. Seeing you come back, chanting your name, it was special. It was magical. I just want to know, how do you reflect back on that night?
It was a fun night. Yeah, thanks, bud. It was, and I thank you, and I appreciate you being there. There's a 5-minute Colt Cabana chant, and I think 2 minutes in, I was like, oh man, this is nice. This is really nice. And a little bit of me is kind of sad that the momentum wasn't carried throughout, but I know Ring of Honor had big plans with the Bullet Club, and as they should. As I've been in Ring of Honor, I've literally seen the Young Bucks change their business model and become these mega stars that they are, and people come to Ring of Honor because of those guys, and everything's kind of been put on the side. So, I'll cherish that night the same way I cherished the night I came back to Ring of Honor another time, and I was Daniel Bryan's surprise partner in the Hammerstein Ballroom, and the place went crazy. That was one of the most special nights of my career. There's all these little special things that I really cherish, but obviously being home in Chicago, I was the Cubbies or I was the White Sox for the team, and I always feel that way when I'm home, and it's a nice feeling. But, luckily, because of the podcast and because of traveling all over the world, sometimes I feel like the hometown player in every place I'm at, which is another nice feeling. But, of course, it's just easy for me to drive 20 minutes down the street and wrestle in front of my people.
Hey Colt, this is Andy from Augusta, Georgia, and I had a question for your AMA. If you met someone who had no idea what professional wrestling was, which match of yours would you show them? So not necessarily your best match or your favorite match, but the one that best represents what pro wrestling is to you. Additionally, what match in history between anyone would you show them to show them what professional wrestling is? Thanks.
Hey, Andy, I'm not, what's weird is that I've been around wrestling and I love wrestling and I watch a lot of wrestling, but I'm also kind of like movies. I don't necessarily like to watch them more than once. I like to live in that moment of not knowing what's happening and watching it. And then, I don't know, I always feel like there's so much to watch, just like movies, that it's hard for me to go back and start watching things multiple times when I know there's other stuff that I haven't seen that I should be watching. And also I'm not as good with like dates and matches and specifics. I just kind of have, it's kind of one of those things where it's like that feeling you feel while you're watching, but I don't necessarily, it's the same with movies. It's like I don't remember all the actors and the plot lines. I just remember the feeling of enjoying or not so much enjoying what was happening. When I do comedy podcasts, I always try to drive people to Les Kellett. He is my comedy wrestling hero. I think if you are a comedy fan and you don't know much about wrestling, if you watch Les Kellett in the right context, you'll say to yourself, wow, this is true comedy. And for me, that's how I think I can get people to cross over. I know it's 1950s or 60s wrestling and nothing to do with now, so maybe that's a slow walk into professional wrestling. Otherwise, now I'd probably make them watch Ospreay and Ricochet, because how can you not watch that and just be like, holy fuck, these are amazing people? Because that's something I also love too, is just amazing people. When I see people that can do stuff that I can't do, right? I'll be on the Facebook feed and I'll always be watching these America's Got Talents or Britain's Got Talents whenever they pop up, because you want to watch stuff that people can do that you can't do. And I feel Ricochet and Ospreay represent that for the world of professional wrestling.
Happy New Year, Colt, from Amanda in You Never Wrestle in California. So, with 2017 coming to an end, I would love to know, what were your personal top 5 favorite moments of the year? It could be a particular match you wrestled, could have been an interview, it could be a place you went to. Let's hear it.
Hi, Amanda. Well, here's the sad thing, is that everything kind of blurs together. I'm afraid I'm going to say something and it's going to be in 2016. And it's hard for me. Oh man, I love doing the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. I love doing WrestleCons. Kind of the bigger events. Was the Chris Gethard show? I don't know if that was 2016 or 17. I did the TV appearance on the Gethard show, being on Chicago PD. That was January 5th. I filmed that, so that was fun. Debuting for DDT was an amazing thing, and also finding a home in DDT, especially while I'm here on this tour. I've really been embraced, and my wrestling style, whereas before in Noah, I would have matches, but the encouragement of being a real goofball was not there. As Pro Wrestling Noah is an offshoot of All Japan, it was a very, very serious promotion. Here, DDT is just ridiculous. So it's so encouraged to open my mind and expand my mind and also get new Japanese fans. And sometimes as a wrestler, I feel like, fuck, I've been around for so long in America, and there was people who loved me. And I think, maybe either being stale or just being on the scene a long time, that they're just like, ugh, Cabana, which I get. It's just sad for me, right? But I get it. And I feel here in DDT, it's just like this new crop of fans that don't know who I am because it's a different language. So it's this ability to just gain new fans who've never seen me. And like, they get to watch a product, which is me, who's been 19 years of developing, and now they get to see it for the first time, and that's really exciting to me. Also putting out a children's book, also doing some stand-up. What else am I forgetting? And seeing you, Amanda, at the shows, and seeing all the great fans at the shows. That sounds cheesy, but I'll say it. I love different fan interactions. I plan on putting some fan interactions on the show, on the new podcast. So, hey, if you got something to say, I might record you. All right. I hope that was enough for you.
What up, Colt? It's Anthony Cortez Haynes, and my AMA question for you is this. Are there any plans for another Wrestling Road Diaries or long-form video documentaries for 2018?
Anthony Cortez Haynes, a.k.a. the original ACH. See what I did there? Listen, in a perfect world, we'd do some Wrestling Road Diaries 4. They're hard to do. There's a lot to put into it. Also, we'll see the success. A lot of the success of the movie has to do with the success of the podcast, because that's kind of the way I can push it. So if this becomes successful, then people will still be listening, and then I'll be able to kind of sell them, I guess, because that's, another part of the podcast is there's an audience that I'm able to then sell my wares to. That was kind of always the idea, is I put out this free content with the idea of you enjoy my work so much that when there's something to sell that you buy. Long form, the idea of the long form I think is going to move to the podcast. Like, that's what I know. That's what I know how to do. A lot of people ask about video, but here's the thing, and I've had this discussion with Joey Ryan, who's upstairs at the moment, is the reason the Young Bucks can't do it is because there's two of them. So Nick can film or Matt can film, but with one person, it's very hard to do, kind of annoying also. And that's why I think the audio, it's going to be easy to do, whereas filming, it's a little bit harder because you have to be behind the camera and you don't want to constantly ask people to film for you. So that's kind of a little secret behind video long form stuff.
Hi, Colt. Paul Cormier here from Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. One of my favorite matches to have seen live, Ring of Honor at the fabled Rexplex, December 2004. Colt Cabana and Jimmy Jacobs with Bobby Heenan in their corner versus Roderick Strong and Jack Evans with Jim Cornette in their corner. Colt, what memories can you share about that night, getting to work with arguably the two greatest managers in the history of the business?
Paul, what a beautiful voice. You should be taking over this podcast. You should be taking over as the voice of Ring of Honor. What memories do I have? I do remember that. I don't think Jim Cornette hated me after that one. I don't know. Maybe he secretly did, right? I thought it was so cool that we were picked to be in this. I understood the importance of it. I don't know if Jack Evans did. That's one thing I took away. But I felt that I understood. I saw how happy that Jim Cornette was to manage across from Bobby Heenan. I saw that love for each other. I think it could have been anybody in the ring. I don't think they had any attachment. I will say this about Bobby Heenan. I don't think he gave a shit about any of the wrestlers or anything, really. And that happened in a lot of locker rooms. And I know Jimmy Jacobs had a bad experience with him, too. But, I never held him accountable to that in my head. Because, I don't know, it was just he had a different viewpoint on wrestling. He was a different part of his career. And hopefully that might happen to me. And I hope that the younger wrestlers don't hate me for it, almost. Maybe that's why. And also, I loved Bobby the Brain Heenan. He never did anything. He wasn't like, Colt, you're a piece of shit. You should quit wrestling, which he did say to other people. But so maybe that's why I never took anything real personal. But I'm glad you enjoyed the match. I know I don't remember exactly move for move. I do remember Bobby Heenan called Jimmy Jacobs' boots Hair Jordans. And there's a picture of me somewhere with Jim Cornette's tennis racket playing it like a guitar. And I hope that image will be removed from the internet.
Hey, Colt. This is Chad McDaniel from Santan Valley, Arizona. Happy freaking New Year. Woo! Hey, my question is, phones, games, do you have an addiction to any games on your phone? And if so, you mind sharing? Thanks.
Hey, Chad, this is actually a good question. As silly as it could sound right away, but the iPhone games are huge in terms of, like, I'm on the road all the time. I'm flying all the time. So in a perfect world, I want a game where I can listen to a podcast and also play a game. So I have two things going at the same time because although I'm not a millennial, I act like one, and I have a short attention span, and I need movement at all times to keep my attention. So over the years, it's been all different stuff. Recently, I've been playing a lot of euchre on the iPhone. Here is a game that I was totally addicted to. It was called Alto's Adventure, but I finished everything. So I went through all the rounds. I got all the achievements. I literally did everything you could do. And now they said they're coming out with a new game, but they haven't. But that was a game that I could play for hours and hours and hours, which is super important to me. Another game here, this is a Cabanism at its finest, is a game that I enjoyed on the iPhone that I thought was called Chamalon. And I would tell people, have you played Chamalon? And they were like, no. And then one day I showed it to someone, and they said, that's chameleon. Right. I never knew. I mean, the word chameleon was never in a class that I took. I had never seen the word chameleon spelled out. For those of you who are on my side, it's Chameleon. Chamelon. Apparently it's chameleon. I like that game too.
Hey Colt, this is your pal Robert John Patterson up in Toronto, Canada. Longtime listener, first time caller. I just wanted to drop you a note praising the Wrestling Road Diaries. I don't think you get enough love for those films. They're not just great wrestling documentaries, but I think they're great documentaries in general. It takes a great skill to make the same movie 3 times in a row and leave an audience wanting more. Seriously though, each film very different and distinct tones, distinct voices, and capturing all that footage and editing it down to a 90-minute story isn't easy, but I think you did a great job. I help run a documentary film group here in Toronto. Shout out to the HS Doc Club. And we see lots of docs that try to do what you do, but sometimes they miss the mark a little bit. It's not as easy as it looks, and I think your 3 films are underappreciated outside the wrestling bubble. And that's a bit of a shame. I have 2 quick questions though. Do you plan to continue the Wrestling Road Diaries series? Maybe as web shorts alongside the new podcast format? You could be like the Anthony Bourdain of indie wrestling, just new towns and Subway restaurants every weekend. It could be interesting. And have you ever thought about doing a non-wrestling documentary? If so, what subjects would you be interested in taking a closer look at? That's all from me, Colt. Before I go, though, I got 2 words for you. Thank you.
Thought it was going to be suck it. That was a long one, RJP, but because it was so nice, I let the whole thing on there. First 2 things, Eric Santa Maria edited and directed the first Wrestling Road Diaries, and Jack Ettinger edited and directed the second and third one. So all credit kind of goes to them. Do I want to do another one? I've had ideas to do another one. I wanted to do one, maybe an audio one. I wanted to do one maybe in Japan, maybe in England at the camps, maybe a comedy one. But like I said before, it kind of has to do with the audience. And like you said, being appreciated outside of the world of professional wrestling. That's probably my fault. I only sold to a specific group of people. It's not on Amazon. It's not on Netflix. I guess that was kind of by choice. And also, I have a little bit of a problem of not letting people help me, which I don't know where it comes from. And when you say doing these other projects like the Anthony Bourdain stuff or whatever, it's because there's a bit of an anxiety and a social anxiety that I know is weird because as a professional wrestler, I'm out there, but it's true. Like in certain positions, it's weird if I don't know people. It's hard for me to kind of let them in and do stuff with people. I know that sounds weird, but that's kind of the reality of it. So it's really hard to collaborate or to want to get other help. And that might have been a lot of not the downfall of some of the things that I've done, but probably in reality, to be honest with you, like a lot of this stuff when it was really hot, when I was starting out, I probably could have grown to even bigger proportions had I allowed people to help me. And that's probably one of my biggest faults is the lack of people helping. Now, I'm saying that so many people have helped me over the years, and I couldn't even give enough thank yous to guys like Jimmy Lee and Brady Russell, who does my website, and Ken Tuccio and High Spot. Just there's so many fucking people. I can't even start because I wouldn't even be able to stop. But that'll probably be the reason why, I don't know, we might not see a lot going farther. I was supposed to have a travel show. I don't know if I talked about this. I don't think I did. This is a little special treat for you guys. I almost had a show on Red Bull TV with my mom and I traveling around the country going to wrestling shows. And we did this big pitch, and we filmed a couple of things, and it just didn't happen. Sadly, I think they changed owners, and it didn't happen. A lot of that stuff has happened over the years. Nothing coming to fruition, but I thought that would have been a lot of fun. And yes, I would love to do any kind of travel show. But in saying that, that's not up to me. That's up to somebody else. And so, it's kind of, I'm doing my wrestling. I'm moving along. Hopefully someone, I don't know, sees my talents, or someone tells other people about my talents, and maybe they'd want to utilize it, and maybe they'd want to use it, and we could do something else. But it's not my passion to make a different kind of show that has nothing to do with wrestling. But I'd love to do it because I love doing that stuff.
Hi, Colt. My name's Simon. I'm from Wales in the UK. First of all, thank you so much for the amazing archive of interviews that you've put together over the last 7.5 years. I've been a listener since about early 2011 and have listened most weeks since. And it's been unlike any other podcast. You've managed to capture people's stories at really unique parts of their career. And I think they're going to hold up really well. It'll be a lot of fun to go back to in years to come. Anyway, my question is, I imagine the podcast has been the thing that's defined you, or defined your career rather, the most over the last 7.5 years. And when you look back at this period of your life, I think I'd like to guess that it would be hard to picture it without the podcast. So anyway, my question is, what do you think will define the next 7 years of your career? Thanks again for all your hard work, and I look forward to hear what comes next. Thanks.
Thanks, buddy. I love that accent. I don't, I guess we don't know. I don't know what was going to, when I started the podcast, I didn't know that was going to define me as the next 7.5 years of my career. But also, I also like to think that all of these things all work together to make what the career was. When I think of the last 7.5 years, I think about all the weird places I traveled to and I wrestled to. But I would like to think you as a listener also think of those experiences too, and think of those experiences through listening to me telling you about them while I'm talking to other wrestlers. So in terms of, yes, talking to people and talking to my friends, but I always looked at talking to my friends not as like its own separate thing, aka a podcast, but I always looked at it as where I was talking to them in my own career, maybe a little bit selfishly or egotistically, but it always kind of had to do with my journey and where I was at. So instead of like, I had this chat with William Regal, it's like, no, this was this weird time where I was backstage and I was talking to Regal and we were talking and I was making a good relationship with him. And he said, hey, I'd be happy to do your podcast. And I was blown away. And that's where I was then. And then there was this weird time where I was in Boston and I was doing a lot of shows for Beyond Wrestling at that time. And Ciampa was hurt and he had a lot on his mind, and we were friends for so long. We were friends in OVW and then Ring of Honor. And then I kind of got fired from Ring of Honor, but we still stayed in touch. And he was doing so great in his career. And I remember him as a 20-year-old, basically a child, kind of getting looked over in WWE at the time. So those are the ways I kind of look at the stories. And I guess, honestly, so the next, part of my career, I will just look at as the stories. And hopefully this podcast will be a nice accent to the stories that I'm able to take part in and that I'm able to tell also.
Hi Colt, I hope you're doing well. This is Alistair coming from Berlin, Germany. Just the one question for me, which would be, if you had an unlimited budget to film the Wrestling Road Diaries 4 and you could choose any 3 people to be in that car, who would you choose?
See, I would still go with my ideas. I would still go, so let's say, oh man, now I stop myself, because a little bit of me would want to do some crazy international trip, but part of the charm of the Wrestling Road Diaries, remember, is the idea that we're not put up in these beautiful hotels and we're not filming and we're not flying luxury airplanes and we're not going first class, is that it's the real life of the independent wrestler. And so a lot of me wants to do something with like Matt Cross and maybe a guy like Sanjay, because remember, it has to do with like friends and chemistry, is this idea of these guys who would do these wild trips, who love doing the random countries. And I think if anyone encapsulates that, it's Sanjay and Matt Cross, of doing Thailand and China and Singapore and Scandinavia and wherever we can wrestle, we want to wrestle, because we can't believe that wrestling is bringing us to all these places. So it'd probably be us traveling around all of the world, wrestling at all of these weird shows, which should be a TV show, I agree, and maybe it would be with a huge budget and a grip and a dolly and catering and all that fun stuff.
Hi, Colt. This is Steve from Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. I first saw you wrestle for Mid-American Wrestling back in the 90s, I think it was. Do you have any good stories about wrestling, either at the Knights of Columbus or if you had the chance to do their summer program on the Ball Diamond. Thank you.
Yeah, Mid-American Wrestling was a big part of me growing up as a wrestler. I have very fond memories of doing all of those shows. Carmine Despierto was the promoter. And it's so funny because Carmine was like 25 at the time, but in my head, he was like this like 45-year-old veteran promoter. He was just a kid. He was a kid promoting wrestling. And he came off as such, this is the way he acted and still acts to this day. And a story that often came out, and hopefully is some kind of inspiration for somebody, is that Punk and I had a tryout in 1999 for Mid-American Wrestling. At that time, Mid-American Wrestling was all of the buzz in the Midwest scene. Carmine did a great job of, I don't know, somehow getting the Knights of Columbus always full. There was like 400 people every single month, and we had a tryout, and Carmine liked Punk, and he did not like me. And he continued to use Punk, and it was kind of sad. But weirdly enough, I found this opportunity in IWA Mid-South, and so I started going down to IWA Mid-South, and Ian Rotten really liked me, and, you know, he wasn't really using Punk. And so eventually, you know, we were kind of taking that match all over the place, and eventually Punk started wrestling in IWA a little more, and then eventually I got another shot in Mid-American because I kept on trucking, and I didn't let that discourage me, and I didn't say, well, fuck Mid-American Wrestling, I'm never going to wrestle there again. I wanted to get in there. I wanted to wrestle there, and eventually I got there. I had a match against Hardcore Craig. We had a very fun match, and then I continued to wrestle there. So a lot of great memories, being in the same building with Mae Young and Sherry Martel, Baron Von Raschke. Carmine was a guy who would bring in a lot of superstars, a lot of people that I never would have shared locker rooms with in the early days, and he was one of the guys. Although I say that now, but so I mean, I did those AWA shows. Some of my very first shows were on shows with Greg the Hammer Valentine, George Animal Steel, King Kong Bundy, Jimmy Snuka, Iron Sheik, all of these legends. So honestly, the very beginning of my career, I was lucky enough to be on a lot of these shows with a lot of legends, which is kind of maybe something I took for granted that a lot of people don't get the opportunity to. But I did, luckily, because I was trained by two guys who were really great trainers and who had a good reputation, and they were on these shows with these people because they were, you know, Danny and Ace were wrestling these tag teams a lot. They would wrestle these older tag teams, Public Enemy, the Road Warriors, so they were on the shows and we would be tagged along. They would try to get us work. So one thing I do remember is Danny and Ace didn't want to wrestle for Mid-American Wrestling because it was known as the quote-unquote hardcore promotion. But I thought it was cool that they were like, yeah, if you want to wrestle there, go for it. And if you want to do hardcore, you can, but you probably shouldn't. And I didn't have a desire to do that. But I did want to be on these good shows because there were great crowds. And I saw that you didn't have to do hardcore wrestling to be on the shows. So same with IW Mid-South. So I wanted to take a part of both of those. And then later, Danny and Ace would kind of come and work for both those promotions. So I always thought that was kind of cool.
Hey, Colt. This is Chad N. Moon from Indiana. Just wanted to know, from your point of view, what is the difference between the pro wrestling culture in the United States today and the pro wrestling cultures in the various nations you've traveled to, let's just say in the last year or so? How are things different? Thanks.
Hey, Chad. People I think that there's this big difference, but I don't really think there is. I'm trying to think. You know, the first real culture shock for me in any wrestling, and I know I'm kind of taking away from your question, but I remember going to Germany for WXW in 2004, and everybody surrounding the ring and singing the songs, and that was something that I had never seen before or seen the likes of before, and I thought it was so amazing. And every time I'm at WXW, I'll always have that memory, and I always think about what a great crowd that they are and were. But I think that wrestling is kind of like the world, is the internet is bringing us all together, and no longer is it a secret what's happening in other places. Everyone's aware of what's happening in other places because of the internet. So we're slowly but surely all coming together as the same crowd in different countries. In saying so, the name just escapes me, but a couple of years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, I wrestled in Germany against this dude who was the oldest German champion. He was this guy who put a belt on himself. And sadly, I say this because he passed away this year. And for the fucking life of me, I want to say Stein something. I can't think of his name. Eddie? Was it Eddie something? I think it was Eddie something. He was like 6'4". He was German. He was in his 60s, I think. And Matt Cross put out a tweet the other day of like, here are the things, if you want to be in wrestling, that you should check off your bucket list. And one of the German parades was one of them. And this is something that they did in Germany years ago, is they would parade the wrestlers around the beginning of the show so everyone knew who was the goodies and who was the baddies, and it would be to a stupid little song, and then you would go to the back, and that was always part of the show. And he was he was the promoter and of such the old school mentality that this is something that he did. And this was in the new era. And it was so weird and old school, but I think I got a real kick out of it because it's something that the people before me had done, and it's something that they don't do now because nowadays it's all so together that it's one show. But there are these little pieces all over the world that some places you could do things like this. This is one. Germany in this specific town was one of them. The camp shows are another one of them. And there's little pieces, but sadly, and greatly but sadly, wrestling's all kind of becoming one thing.
Hey, Colt, it's Roel from San Antonio. We met before at the Great San Antonio Bash last September, and we've exchanged emails. I'm sure you remember. I hope, anyway. Anyway, I know we're both fans of wrestling, but you've talked a lot about comedy, and one comedy show in particular was Kids in the Hall. And I was just curious, who's your favorite comedian out of the troupe, and which is your favorite skit out of all the episodes of Kids in the Hall, if you can say? Mine I think would be Chicken Lady or the Head Crusher, I guess, or the Eradicator would be mine. But I was just curious what yours were. Anyway, thanks, man.
Hey, buddy. Of course I remember you. I grew up on Kids of the Hall, The State. These were the alternative comedy shows that I mentioned to Vince McMahon in my meeting when he asked what alternative comedy was. And then I was like, oh, why did I even say this? He has no clue what any of this is or means. My favorite skit of Kids of the Hall was definitely the Head Crusher. And I liked a lot of them. Bruce McCullough, Dave Foley, Scott Thompson. For some reason, the idea that they all dressed like women was always super funny to me. And looking back, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, or I don't know if that had any implications on my life. Maybe in terms of like being okay with being a wrestler, dressing up as a wrestler. I don't know. But that was always something that weirdly stuck out with me. But thanks for talking about comedy on the MA today.
Hey, Colt. My name is Dalton. I'm from Waterford, Maine. I'm currently training to be a professional wrestler, and I hope to wrestle in Japan one day. What are your fondest memories of the first time you were ever booked in Japan? Thanks.
Hey, Dalton. It's fun that you asked that question while I'm in Japan. My very first memory is having a meal with legendary wrestling fan Masa Hori, Steve Corino, who brought me over, and Nick Bockwinkel. That was the first Japanese meal I had. I didn't know what to do. It was such a crazy culture shock, and it kind of goes back, Chad, to your question of wrestling in different cultures. And at the time, it was a culture shock. And even in, I guess, 2006, it wasn't as westernized as it was now. And, it was more westernized in 2006 than it was probably for the guys that wrestled there in the 90s and the 80s. So going to internet cafes to check my internet once a day, to check my emails, wrestling the very first show that I was on tour at Korakuen Hall with Masato Tanaka, and really being able to say to myself, like, I did it, I got here, I got my Ribera jacket, I can kind of justify my wrestling career. I am a traveling full-time professional wrestler. This was January 2006, because like the ones before me, I've been able to go and now tour Japan. And it's a real credit that someone will fly you over to another country and put you on a show as a promotional tool and believes in you as a foreigner to come over and help your business. And that's what 01 did at the time, and I'll always be grateful for that. And for Steve Corino for being the American booker and bringing me over. And they still have some of my shirts and headbands that I'm sure is in their storage locker that they never gave back to me. So 01, give me those fucking shirts. All right? All right, we got one more. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Rick Guzman from Queens, New York. Want to thank Colt for all the great matches over the years. And I'm wondering if Lucha Underground were to continue and to reach out to you about signing with them, would you consider going over either as Colt, as Matt Classic, or maybe somebody completely new? Thanks very much.
Hey, Rick, thanks for asking. And I saved this one for last because I don't like the hypothetical question. Sorry, Rick, but what I do think is an important thing to end this on is the idea of the independent contractor and not trying to bog down. And years ago, I really stuck to my guns of not signing any kind of contracts because I love what I do traveling around. And now, wow, the game has changed so much and everybody's signing every kind of contracts they can. And luckily enough for me, I have this weird clout where I'm always a man of my word. I think I've never done anything to really screw anybody over. And the guilt really will, the Jewish guilt will stick with me if I did screw somebody over. So it's not something I like to take part of. So luckily for me, I still don't have these contracts. And I always said to these people, like, if you're going to sign me or someone to a contract, you can't pay us the wage. Before, I guess I would always say of like a janitor. But janitors do great. Some janitors do amazing. So maybe I wish I would get paid the wage of a janitor. But a lot of people are giving these contracts for just silly little amount of money and guaranteed and the lack of guaranteed get dates. So if I ever was to sign something, it'd really have to be a wonderful deal or worth my while or something like that, if that kind of makes sense. So I will say this. I was offered contracts and work in TNA years ago. And I was offered to work at Lucha Underground and a couple other places. But something I said to myself after being released from the WWE, and I kept true to myself, was I don't want to have to prove myself to anybody, if that makes sense. So a lot of these deals were like, prove to me that you're worth it. And I wanted... And maybe this is selfishly, maybe this is stupid, but I wanted the idea of someone really coming after me and wanting me and really wanting me for the idea that I have an audience, for the idea that I'm good at my job, for the idea that I've been around and I know what I'm doing, for the idea that I think that I'm smart to the wrestling industry. And the Lucha Underground deal was like, hey, if you ever want to come, you're more than welcome, which didn't seem like a headhunting opportunity for me. So it was nothing I really ever pursued. But in saying that, Joe Koff was calling me and was hitting me up, and when I came back was so welcoming with open arms, and that meant a lot to me. And the idea of like, hey, if you say you're going to be at every show, we'll believe you'll be at every show. And I have a freedom, which is a weird spirit that I've always had inside of me, of wanting this freedom, of not being held down or accountable to something, which could be psychologically broke down somehow. I'm not sure. But right now I have this freedom. I like this freedom. And I'm going to continue doing this freedom unless something amazing comes out. And there's no choice. It would be stupid for me to not sign it. So that's where I stand with Lucha Underground. That's where I stand with my career. And that's where I stand in front of you, answering your questions, getting to know a little bit more about me after all these years and where we're moving forward. So I appreciate it. Like I said, don't expect anything great coming from this podcast in the future. I'm keeping expectations as low as possible, but I do want to give out something for the people who have listened to me for so long, who are used to me in their ears, and just enjoy a little Colt Cabana every single week. I want to continue that, and I think this is a fun opportunity, and we never know. It might grow into something amazing, or it might be really shitty, but either way, there was too many of you who really appreciated what was happening and told me they would have been sad if this thing had gone away. So I'm excited. It's giving me a new lease on life. Not really, but it's giving me something that I'm really looking forward to creating, like editing and seeing how I could piece it together. So until next time, I want to tell you about some of my plugs and
upcoming events.
ColtMerch.com, DigitalColt.com, Twitter and Instagram at Colt Cabana, Facebook /AOW Podcast, also Colt Cabana, the Storytelling Podcast, Pro Wrestling Fringe, plus all of the past archives from The Art of Wrestling. They're going to be ad-free on StitcherPremium.com/Colt. Use the code COLT. Got a free month. ColtWrestling@gmail.com, my very public email. I got a YouTube channel. I also got a website, ColtCabana.com. That's where you can find my P.O. Box, which is brand new. Send me something. I'll get it when I get home from Japan. Upcoming Saturday, January 6th, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Facebook /First Wrestling. Friday, January 12th, La Crosse, Wisconsin, Facebook /River City CW. Sunday, January 14th, Chicago, Illinois, Facebook /Zello Pro. January 20th, Saturday, Nashville. I'll be doing commentary for ROHWrestling.com. Friday, January 26th, Winnipeg, Canada. And I believe Saturday, January 27th, Thunder Bay, Canada. Facebook/Primo's Exhibition 2. I got a bunch of February dates, but I don't have them with me right now. If you want to book me, you always can. ColtWrestling@gmail.com. That is the show for this week. Thank you to everybody who sent in a question. It was a lot of fun to sit here and answer the questions for you. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thanks to Cable Guy Jeff and Stu Stone. Thanks to Kid Russell and Matt Jenkins on the music. Dane Miller and Creaky with tech help. Thanks to HighSpots.com, a wonderful sponsor. They have a VOD service. You can watch PWG. You can watch Kevin Steen shows. You can get AMA knee pads. You can get gear. You can get masks, a wrestling ring. OneHourTees.com. They help run ProWrestlingCrate.com. They help run ProWrestlingTees.com. Also, TweakedAudio.com/Colt, the earbuds that I use. Get over 30% off and free shipping just because you listen to this show. AMA, ask me anything. I appreciate it. That is the show for this week. This has been The Art of Wrestling. For Colt Cabana, I'm Colt Cabana. Thanks.